And that fine fella right there is Adam Scher. How you doing, man? We got a 6-gamer. Not a whole lot to talk about, though. Did I lose you already, Adam? Tell me I lost you. Oh, here we go. There he is. There he is. Droopy eyes. Can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
All right. Let's rock and roll. How you feeling? 6-gamer today. Not a whole, like I mentioned to you earlier today, this is probably one of the slates that there's a lot less to talk about than most. But we're going to do it anyway because it's actually not a bad one. It just doesn't have as much depth as you would usually see. And all the good pitching is in the upper middle tier.
Yeah, for sure. It's a pretty wide open slate, I think, as far as playing tournaments. I think slates like this are pretty fun because there's a couple of clear spots where teams are underpriced or in a little bit better matchups, but everyone sees those and it's still only one or two spots. So with how baseball is, there's an edge to getting to these other teams that are in a little bit less attractive spots of lower ownership.
All right. So I guess we just dive right into it because there's no real way to, usually we preface the show with something here or there. We kind of already did. It's just one of those nights where, well, let's start with Philadelphia and Milwaukee. It's been terrible here, the weather the past couple of days. I think we should be clear for this one, though, Adam. It looks like it's going to clear up. Aaron Nola at home, Citizens Bank Park, going up against, well, Freddie Peralta will likely be the long reliever. You were spot on with him last time. You had mentioned that you liked him over, who was the other guy? Was it Chirinos? I can't remember. Or Jalen Beeks, I think it was. I think it was Jalen Beeks last time we had this opportunity. But let's start with Aaron Nola. The Milwaukee Brewers have a 3.6 run total. And something that's kind of fascinating about this matchup is on paper, there are definitely some spots that would concern you. But when you look at this Brewers team, in all, you're looking at a squad that is tied for the highest K rate in the league against right-handed pitching. I think it's sitting at like, what is it at? 28%? It's pretty high. I can tell you that much. 26.3%. And they're bottom 10 in WOBA, ISO, and WRC plus against righties this year. So we know they can do a lot of damage. They have a lot of power. But this is also a team that you can exploit as well if you're a pitcher that can get strikeouts.
Yeah, and also I think you're getting Nola at a bit of a discount because of how much talent is in the Milwaukee lineup, even though they have struggled a bit against right-handed pitching, like you said, this year. I think Travis Shaw probably has a lot to do with that. Obviously off to a terrible start, coming in at like minimum salary on Yahoo, 2,600 on DraftKings today. But so I expect him to get better going forward. But Nola is, I think, a better pitcher than his $9,200 DraftKings price tag. So I think there is some value there. I have him projected as my top pitcher on the slate, not by a huge margin, not by Jacob deGrom the other night margins or anything like, or Blake Snell yesterday. But I do have him as my top guy. His strikeout numbers go up at home, as you would expect. It's like 50 degrees in Philly, so the ball shouldn't carry quite as much as we'll see later in the summer. And he is facing a pitcher. There's strikeouts in the lineup. I'm not too concerned by his numbers so far this year. His swinging strike percentages haven't been very appealing, but if you look at called strike plus swinging strike percentage out of all starters that have thrown at least 200 pitches this year, Nola ranks 18th, 31.5%. It's down from 32.8% last year, but it's still a very good number, and I'm just not really concerned about him. So, Milwaukee's scary. Taking chalk pitchers against Milwaukee is even scarier, but I still like Nola quite a bit.
I'm told I'm echoing, so I'm trying to figure this out. I don't hear it now. I heard it before. You guys in chat can let me know if it's still coming. I think it stopped. But anyway, you had mentioned the called strike plus swinging strike rate. It's really crazy when you compare that to his swinging strike rate, right? Like he has, and obviously they're combined, but Aaron Nola on this slate alone, right, has a swinging strike rate that ranks it's got to be towards the bottom. It is maybe the fourth or fifth lowest swinging strike rate, but he also has the second or third highest called strike plus swinging strike rate. And we know that when Aaron Nola is running right, it's because of the way he's placing his pitches. It's because he can drop the curveball in for strikes or get you to swing over it. I think we're seeing more of that recently where he's looked a whole lot sharper. Obviously this park is not great for pitching, but at the same time, it's pretty cold here as well. Let me ask you this. I mentioned to you last week where I heard that the broadcaster's saying, yeah, and I haven't looked into it, saying like, oh yeah, Aaron Nola is better in the warm weather. I don't know if that's true, but I don't really know if you can really make any decisions off of it anyway, but it will be 49 degrees in Philly today. So just figured I'd bring it up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how to quantify that. And in general, I just ignore when announcers say that because normally they're just totally making stuff up. But
it's so true. It's so true. Sometimes, once in a while, they'll give you something that has some value. And Aaron Nola did look really solid in that outing. What about the other side of this one? Freddie Peralta should come in long relief through, or actually, is he starting or is, because I'm seeing.
He's starting today.
Yeah, he's starting. That's right. So he's getting the nod. I know you liked him better in long relief, which I like him better there too. When you're a 2-pitch pitcher that leans on one pitch 80% of the time, it helps. But what do you make of this spot against the Phillies at Citizens Bank?
I think it's a tough spot, and it doesn't do him any favors that he doesn't get to skip, the McCutchen, Hoskins, Harper part of the order the first time through. His numbers since coming up last year have been really bad in the first inning and much better every inning after that. I don't buy into that too much. I mean, I think it makes sense because you are facing normally the best hitters on the team in the first inning. But beyond that, I don't really know why he would be so much worse in the first inning. But it's more so that if you were coming out of the bullpen, he would get the start against guys like, Hernandez, Herrera, Franco at the bottom, who are good, but not nearly as good as the top of this order. Starting this game against, McCutchen, Segura, Harper, Hoskins, that's a really tough spot to start in. He is inexpensive, which is nice, but I don't think I'm going to get to a lot of him on this particular slate.
Me neither. I don't think I really plan on going cheap at pitcher at all. I don't think you need to on this slate. Maybe you have a different opinion. We'll get there because we're going to cover every game. What about hitters on either side? Is there Nola's been very good, but he still has. We know he's prone to giving up some home runs at times. And then Freddie Peralta on the other side has really only had 2 good performances all season long. Is this a game where you could see yourself looking to some bats?
Yeah, I was getting a lot of Philadelphia in my initial crunches. Milwaukee's bullpen hasn't been that great this year. I think there's a good chance this is a slate that's won because of a bullpen that implodes. Basically, every starter on this slate is at least decent, if not good. So I think bullpens are pretty important here. Milwaukee's has really struggled this year. They've been, moving pieces in and out. And Philadelphia just has a really good lineup. Peralta, obviously, is a huge question mark on his own. As far as Milwaukee goes, I'm kind of frustrated with how little I've been getting in my initial crunches, because with it being a 6-game slate and we know Nola is going to pick up a lot of ownership, Milwaukee's the kind of offense that in theory I would really like to get to. But even with all the things that I have in place to kind of bump up, highly leveraged stacks against popular pitchers, I'm still not getting to a lot of Milwaukee right now. So if you're getting there, I think it's a good idea. It's the kind of stuff that I like to do. It's just not really showing up in my lineups yet right now.
Right. Yeah. And, the lineup for today: Kane, Yelich, Moustakas, Grandal, Eric Dames, Travis Shaw, Arcia, Freddie Peralta, Ben Gamel. I will say this much. When you look at some of the K rates on this team, Grandal, Eric Dames, Ben Gamel, I'm not sure about Shaw, but you have a lot of these guys with 25+% K rates. What kind of sucks actually though, Adam, is guys like Hernan Perez and Ryan Braun have added to that a lot against righties. I know, a lot more plate appearances for Braun than Perez. I'm not saying this is a bad lineup for Nola because, you have a bunch of strikeouts in the middle of it, but there are a few bats in this lineup, or that aren't in the lineup but are on the roster, that if they were in there would have made it that much more appealing for Aaron Nola just from a strikeout standpoint alone. All right.
Yeah, I missed most of what you said.
That's fine. Detroit and Houston, Matt Boyd, Brad Peacock. So Peacock last start, you had mentioned that with Alex Gordon out of the lineup, that one little tweak made a big difference. Now, I'm not going to attribute all of his 12 strikeouts to one change in the lineup, but Brad Peacock's been very good against righties this season. And then once you get through the 1 and the 2, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 6 righties here. Heimer Candelario is your only other lefty or switch hitter once you get past Goodrum and Kristen Stewart, who I think we can talk about being pretty decent plays on this slate. Peacock's ownership, though, was last I looked, projected way lower than guys like Nola, way lower than guys like Bieber, and of course lower than guys like Robby Ray. I have quite a bit of interest in him against 6 righties and a very high strikeout team. What do you make of the pitching matchup between Peacock and Boyd?
I have a lot of interest in Peacock too, and I'm really curious to see where his ownership comes in, because the projection systems that I looked at all have him, I think, lower than I would. Like, yeah, I bumped him up in mine, and I just think it's a really favorable matchup for him against Detroit with 6 righties in there, like you said, plenty of strikeouts in the lineup. So I do think I get to a lot of Peacock today. Hopefully, the field doesn't really get there. I expect he'll be popular, but maybe not as popular as he should be. He's struck out almost 30% of righties this year. If you go back to last year, it's been the same thing, that he's really dominant against righties, and he struggles with lefties. So you mentioned Kristen Stewart. I like getting to him in non-Peacock lineups. I get some Goodrum. I get Castellanos just because he's cheap, but overall, I think it's a lineup where Peacock should have success. And his price, he's not cheap, but he's also not really expensive. Especially if you look on FanDuel, he is at an even bigger discount compared to guys, ahead of him. It's basically him and Robby Ray at 85 and 8,800, and then you have Nola and those guys up in the mid 9K range. So I think that you get a little bit of a discount there. I do like Peacock quite a bit. I was getting to Detroit mini stacks as well. I do think it's interesting that if you go to the stacking tool on awesemo.com, that Detroit is actually, at least right now, using our ownership projections, one of the more overvalued teams on the slate. And that's probably just because of their cheap price tags on DraftKings. So I'm more interested in a team like Detroit if Peacock is really popular and Detroit's not. If it's vice versa, and if it's still projected that way at 630, there's less merit in getting to the Detroit bats and more merit in getting to Peacock.
Yeah, exactly. Peacock projected for 7% ownership on FanDuel. Bieber at 16% and Robby Ray at 30%, Nola at 27%, and then Nola at 39% on DraftKings, Bieber 33%, Ray 28%, Peacock 26%. Now, I just want to make something clear. If you're over on Yahoo and you're looking at pitching, Robby Ray is $41, which is pretty absurd given his upside. Even on FanDuel, Robby Ray is way too cheap. But on DraftKings, and I like Peacock everywhere, but on DraftKings, where he's $1,500 less than Ray, he's $500 less than Bieber, his ownership has come up from earlier in the day where it was way lower than I had expected. But to me, it still seems like a spot where, with 6 righties in the lineup, his numbers against them are very, very good. We both talked about Nico Goodrum and Kristen Stewart. I think they're perfectly fine, but I also don't hate the idea of just one-offing them either, right? So if you have like a Ray Peacock line, or sorry, Ray Nola lineup, or Bieber and Nola, and you're left with 3,700. Those two guys at the top of the lineup with the platoon advantage against Peacock, who has not been very good against lefties, make for pretty fine one-offs, even if you're not stacking Detroit.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Kristen Stewart is basically one of my favorite value hitters every single day. People don't really get there because Detroit normally isn't a popular stack, and people don't like their offense overall. But this is a guy that has hit really well throughout the minors, projects for over a 200 ISO in the majors, has over a 200 ISO in his limited sample size so far. He's just a higher upside guy than his price tag normally dictates, and you normally can get him at relatively low ownership just because nobody knows who the hell he is.
Agreed. Now that we get that out of the way, we both agree on the Peacock plus Detroit bats situation. But where do you stand on Houston bats and Matt Boyd? My guess is, not you, but in general, lack of positional depth and lack of great hitting is going to push a lot of people onto Houston bats, whether they want to or not, especially given that there's no Max Scherzer or DeGrom on this slate where you're paying $11K plus for. Matt Boyd's been very good, though. So where do you stand, and how do you rationalize this matchup for both of them?
It's another spot, kind of like I talked about with Peacock and where the projected ownership ends up, because I think Matt Boyd is very, very, very good. And obviously Houston is one of the best offenses in baseball. Detroit's bullpen is not very good. So if they somehow can get to Boyd, it's a spot where they have the potential to just absolutely blow up if they can get Boyd out of this game. Right now on Awesemo.com, we have Houston as one of the more undervalued stacks in terms of the percent chance that they are the top scoring stack compared to our projected ownership for them. So if that ends up being the case, I wouldn't mind getting there just because of the pure upside, even though I think Matt Boyd's really good. But if the ownership on Houston creeps up as we get closer to lock, then I'm interested in getting some Matt Boyd in my lineups, not as my highest owned pitcher or anything like that, because it is a brutal matchup in terms of strikeouts and obviously a very productive Houston offense. But Matt Boyd is just really good. If you look at all pitchers this season that have thrown at least 500, all starting pitchers that have thrown at least 500 pitches, Boyd trails only Blake Snell, Strasburg, Garrett Cole, Derek Holland, Carlos Carrasco in called strike plus swinging strike percentage at 33.6%. He's been absolutely amazing.
Yep. Highest on the slate.
Coming off of a start against an Angels team that strikes out even less than the Astros, struck out 6 in 6 innings, gave us another good start. He's priced right in the middle of that whole Aaron Nola, Brad Peacock, Shane Bieber range. So there's basically no way that he gets ownership. So it really depends for me how the ownership ends up coming out at the closer clock.
And something interesting too about about Boyd is it hasn't just been against righties or lefties. He has a 33% K rate against lefties this year, 28.2% K minus BB rate, and a 30.9% K rate against righties with a 25% K minus BB rate. So he's getting a ton of missed bats, a ton of strikeouts, and a very limited amount of walks, regardless of what handedness the hitter is. I won't lie, though. I mean, a matchup with Houston, not only their power, but just their absolute lack of strikeouts always concerns me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a horrible spot, and I'm not trying to get to Boyd with like a ton of frequency. It's just that I think he's a really good pitcher and people won't be there. But one thing working in Houston's favor too, if we take ownership out of it, is that with Altuve out, you suddenly get a Houston lineup that's actually pretty cheap. Getting to guys like Gurriel, Diaz, White, it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it does open up a lot of salary, and it gives you the opportunity to get 2 good pitchers with a Houston stack where you still can fit in like an Alex Bregman or, Carlos Correa at reasonable price points as well. It just gives you a ton of upside throughout the lineup. So again, even though I love Matt Boyd as a pitcher and I hate taking hitters against him, there's not a whole lot of spots on the slate that you feel really great about. Like I can give you a negative for basically every single stack. And if Houston is going to not be all that popular, then I don't mind getting there in tournaments.
All right. I think that's reasonable take. Any particular bats you like on Houston, like that you're one-offing or in a stack you're prioritizing? Is there anyone you like more than the next?
Alex Bregman should never be $4,600 in any matchup, and that's his price on DraftKings. So I really like him. I think that Aledmus Diaz batting 6th with multi-position eligibility and most importantly, second base eligibility is good. He's not the best hitter or anything, but it's a weak position. He's hitting 6th in a lineup that is one of the higher projected totals on the slate.
All right, let's talk about Minnesota and LA. Jose Berrios, Tyler Skaggs. Berrios is a very good pitcher. He's fallible. He makes mistakes. He will give up some home runs, but he's very good. And unsurprisingly, Adam, he's been much better at home again this year, which has been the case for Berrios every single season. On the other side, you have Tyler Skaggs, good curveball, solid pitcher. But when you're talking about a slate like this, where most of the pitchers are good, or at least not horrible, I say most, it leads me to gaining more interest in a Minnesota team that has some pretty talented hitters. For example, CJ Cron batting 3rd is one of my favorite plays on this entire slate. Mitch Garver's ridiculously expensive, but let's talk about this matchup. If you have interest in the pitchers, we can start there and then get to the bats.
I don't have a lot of interest in the pitching. It's a really tough spot for Skaggs, and I think I would rather, if I'm going to that cheap SP2 range, I think I would most like to get to Ronaldo Lopez because of the ownership that Cleveland's going to have. So obviously we'll talk about that next game, but I don't see a whole lot of Tyler Skaggs in my lineups tonight. And then Berrios, he's projected for really low ownership, which makes me really want to like him. The problem is just that the Angels strike out the least amount of any team in baseball, and Matt Boyd is cheaper. So like the lineups that I'm basically just hoping that my pitcher's talent wins out, most of those are allocated towards Boyd instead of Berrios. So not getting the much Berrios here. Wouldn't be surprising at all to see a good game out of him, but there's just too many pitchers priced around him that I like a little bit more. As far as the Minnesota bats go, I do think that they are in a reasonably good spot. Skaggs is a decent pitcher, but like you said, most pitchers on this slate are good. So I don't mind getting to some of the right-handed power here. CJ Cron, you mentioned, I really like. Marwin Gonzalez is still essentially free with multi-position eligibility, which is nice. Carver's really expensive, but you do get Williams Astudillo batting sixth at a more reasonable price tag. We talk about him all the time that he doesn't walk, he doesn't strike out. So you're getting a guy that 4 or 5 times in a game is going to hit the ball and give you a chance at points. So he's always an appealing catcher option. Polanco is a little more expensive than I would like. Rosario is expensive in the lefty-lefty matchup. So I don't know how much full Minnesota stacking I'll get to, but I do like Astudillo and CJ Cron and Marvin Gonzalez individually.
All right. And Nelson Cruz, not in the lineup, but the MRI on his wrist came back clean, so that's good. I don't imagine an IL stint is going to be in store for Cruz, but not in the lineup today, which isn't necessarily great if you're talking about stacks. It would have been a lot more favorable given that he was. But I really like CJ Cron a lot, and like you said, Estudillo, if you don't want to pay a monster price tag for Mitch Garver, although he is leading off, Estudillo is not the worst play either at a terrible catcher position. On the other side, I mean, Shohei Ohtani is just cheap, so it's kind of hard for me not to think that 4,100 in any matchup isn't worth targeting. But I do have a lot of respect for Berrios. Where do you come in on something like this?
I have a ton of respect for Berrios too, and I completely agree with you that Ohtani is too cheap. Not so much on Yahoo, but especially on DraftKings at 4,100 and FanDuel at 3,500 is a nice price tag as well. He's just a really, really good hitter, and people kind of overlook that whenever he's not in a really easy matchup because he obviously only had so many at bats last year, but he's a really good hitter, and getting the price discount here makes him really appealing. Obviously, Mike Trout, if you can get there, is always a good play. But against Berrios here in Minnesota, the Angels are kind of just coming in as like a middle of the road stack for me.
All right. Yeah, Ohtani mostly just because of how cheap he is on DraftKings and FanDuel. I mean, no matter how good like you said, Bregman should never be 4,600. I don't care about the matchup. Ohtani against any righty should never be 41. Hell, even lefties, I don't care. He's that good. Let's talk about this game. Cleveland Indians at the White Sox, guaranteed rate field. Shane Bieber, Ronaldo Lopez. But we're going to spend some time on Cleveland bats, I'm certain of it. But what are your thoughts on Shane Bieber first, who we know has some pretty wild splits? There's no question there. But he's got 5 lefties in this White Sox lineup tonight. If you want to explain a little further how different we've seen him perform against lefties and righties, or why it matters or doesn't matter to you, let's hear it.
I think it's a interesting spot because I do like Bieber a ton as a pitcher. I think that obviously there are a lot of strikeouts in the White Sox lineup. This is probably the toughest lineup they could have run out against Bieber. Lower swinging strike percentage against lefties, a lot more power allowed to lefties. Going back to last season when he came up, he has a 13.9% swinging strike percentage and a 161 expected ISO to righties compared to just a 10.8% swinging strike percentage and a 205 X ISO to lefties. So clearly he does have splits there. And you do have power lefties in Yohan Moncada and Yonder Alonso. Alonso in particular, $10 on Yahoo, $34 on DraftKings, and I think $2,600 on FanDuel. So Really nice price tags for Yonder Alonso. But then you also get, Charlie Tilson leading off, not a great hitter, but a lefty. Nicky Delmonico hitting sixth, not a great hitter, but still a guy that's a pretty difficult out, not a ton of power. It makes the lineup a little bit tougher for Bieber. And the two righties that are in the top six are just good hitters in Abreu and Tim Anderson. So I do think the matchup is a bit tougher than I expected just because of the lineup that Chicago is rolling out. But I do still like Bieber. I expect I'll get a little bit less of him than Nola, a little bit less than Brad Peacock, but probably my third highest owned DraftKings pitcher on the slate. That said, I don't mind leveraging against him with this lineup because you do get affordable bats in Alonso, in Delmonico. Moncada is, reasonably priced and should be really low owned because he's more expensive than Matt Chapman and Jose Ramirez at third base. So getting to the White Sox as a leverage stack, I think does make sense here because you do have some lefty power mixed in with just good right-handed bats.
Right now on our on our it's called Awesemo's Top Stacks, but it's the stack tool. If you were going to go over to awesemo.com and check it out, it'd be under the MLB tab under Awesemo's Top Stacks. We'll call it the stack tool just to make it easier. And if you want to check all of this out, get a look behind the paywall, you can use the promo code Deeper Dive, all one word, Deeper Dive, to get access to the ownership projections, to Awesemo's Top Stacks. Oh, and by the way, the ownership projections today are free. So if you want to get a look behind everything without having to use any promo code, which is Deeper Dive, all one word, of course, you can check out the ownership projections for free today. But also the actual player projections for all of our sports, the top stacks, the rankings from Awesemo himself, and so much more. Lineup Builder, Fantasy Cruncher add-on with Fantasy Cruncher Pro, articles from Adam, myself, and many more, and of course all of our best analysts for all of our sports. So you want to get half off your first month at awesemo.com. Use the promo code Deeper Dive, one word, and if you're yet to be a sub, you can check out the free ownership projections today. Okay. Before I just went on about all that, I wanted to mention that the ownership right now on Awesemo's Stack Tool, Chicago White Sox right now have the lowest projected stack ownership at 3.2%. So pretty much way lower than any other team today.
Yeah, they were one of the teams that right now is undervalued. It's not that they have a super high chance of being the highest owned stack, but when you compare their percentage of being the highest owned stack to the projected ownership for this team, they're one of the more undervalued on the slate.
Right. Yeah, and look, it's not a good spot for them, honestly. And Cleveland, is not a terrible bullpen either. So you could definitely find better spots. But that tool is really nice, though, just to get a look inside, Adam, to get a look at like percent, the probability of being the top stack or the top value, but also being the top stack. And then, generally speaking, if the probability for being the top stack and the top value are both high, then you've got yourself something really nice. How do you go about using this tool?
Yeah, so it's something that I've started to implement more because even though I have a lot of things in place in my process to keep me from just basically jamming chalk every slate across my 150 lineups, I still find sometimes that I'm getting, I'm missing exposure to some stacks that I really would like to have that are low owned. So I've started kind of incorporating it to limit, taking the top few or whatever kind of overvalued stacks and just, limiting my allowed exposure to the five mans of that group, still get their hitters as, one-offs or three mans or four mans or whatever. But it just lets me get more of the undervalued five-man stacks into my lineups, which I then, rank and play. And I think it's giving me better exposures that I like it a bit more.
Cool. All right. Ronaldo Lopez. It has been a rough go for him. He had one ridiculous game where he struck out 14 batters. And as far as strikeouts go, Ronaldo Lopez actually hasn't been terrible. 29% K rate against righties, Adam. But against lefties this year, he's got a 4% K minus BB rate, a 444 WOBA, 2 home runs per 9, and a 2.33 whip. A really high whip like that is kind of important on sites like DraftKings where, for a pitcher, no one's playing Lopez anyway. But what I'm saying is it gives, that he's not just giving up home runs, he's giving up a lot of base runners as well, particularly to left-handed hitters. And Cleveland has a lot of them last time I looked.
Yeah, pretty brutal matchup for Lopez. I mentioned before that if I do have to go cheap at pitching, I prefer getting to him in tournaments. And it has nothing to do with him. Well, it has nothing to do with his matchup. We do know that he has strikeout upside. He has good stuff. It's just a matter of him putting it all together in any individual start. But the primary reason that he'd be my preferred cheap SP2 if I have to get to one is just the ownership that we're getting on Cleveland. I mean, when you're talking about the current DFS environment on sites outside of Yahoo, which obviously has much better payout structures than DraftKings and FanDuel, and you don't have to think about it in these terms, but you look at other sites where 25% of the prize pool is going to first place out of 15,000 people, and half the prize pool is going to like the top 5 spots. It's really not about being right that often. It's just about beating other players. And I don't think there's a huge difference between, guys like Ronaldo Lopez and Tyler Skaggs, in terms of projection, but there is a big difference in projected ownership for Cleveland. So just leveraging against Cleveland where I do have to use a cheap SP2 because of my hitters, I may as well just give myself the best chance to win a tournament. And that's, in teams that don't have Cleveland bats, having Lopez, because that just makes it easier. So it's nothing to do with the matchup. I don't like the matchup. I do love Cleveland bats. They're projected for high ownership, but they're actually not that overvalued. If you look at the stacking tool, their percentage chance of being the top stack actually isn't much higher than our projected ownership, or much lower than our projected ownership for them. So I do like getting to them. They do have really, really cheap price tags. I just wanted to, mention that Lopez does give you a little bit of added value because of the ownership on Cleveland.
All right. And if you haven't checked out Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports yet, I'm dropping the link into the YouTube chat right now. You get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. Yes, YSRPs, which you can then play as real money on the site upon depositing. So like Adam said, if you're not in the business of trying to beat out 100,000 people, and if you don't get first place, you get a fraction of the prize pool. Well, Yahoo Sports has made it so it's not nearly as rough in that respect. Now, look, you're not winning $100,000 or $50,000 each night, but there's still some solid prize pools, and not only that, 10 limit entries, 10 entry limit per person, not 150. So if you're not someone that's trying to mess around with Fantasy Cruncher, doesn't have the time, or just doesn't want to do it, and more enjoys doing this for fun or to make some money, but are doing it not necessarily as a job, Yahoo is a perfect destination for that. Use the link, check it out in the chat. And you get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points, again, just for signing up and depositing. So there you have it. Hopefully we'll see you over there. Proud sponsor of the Deeper Dive, Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. All right, Adam. Anything else from this one that you want to discuss? I mean, Cleveland bats, actually. I know you talked a lot about Lopez, and I know that Cleveland's going to be popular. It is hard for me to look and say, yeah, well, because they're going to be popular, I'm not interested. It's just Ronaldo Lopez has such massive blow-up potential. He gives up power, and he gives up base runners, and he's not great at holding runners. And you have Wellington Castillo behind the plate today. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It really makes for and by the way, I say Castillo because it's not James McCann, which is a better base running matchup for opponents. There's just so much about this matchup for so many of these lefties that is really, really appealing tonight.
Yeah, McCann also not the worst pitch caller in the world, like Wellington Castillo is.
Yeah.
So that's a benefit for Cleveland as well.
Ask Kevin Gausman.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, because I did talk a lot about Lopez. I clearly prefer Cleveland bats here. I'm okay with them being popular. They're just so cheap. They have so many lefties. They give you so much upside. Jose Ramirez is basically priced to the floor because he's off to a bad start this year, but he's still Jose Ramirez. Lindor's price tag isn't bad. You have power in Jake Bauers. Carlos Santana is a perfectly fine hitter. It's a pretty nice lineup. Don't sleep on Leonis Martin hitting 8th. He's been getting, even on slates recently where Cleveland is popular, Martin's been getting virtually no ownership because he hits at the bottom of the lineup, but he has speed, he has power, he's a high upside player. So he's a way that you can differentiate amongst a popular Cleveland stack.
All right. Arizona, Pittsburgh, Robby Ray, Nick Kingham. It's pretty wild that Ray is priced where he is on Yahoo and on FanDuel. He's $8,800 on FanDuel. On Yahoo, he's $41 at him. I mean, I get that Robby Ray is a pretty volatile guy, but he's also somebody that is a 30% strikeout pitcher and has been for a while now. There's so much upside in Robby Ray, such a high ceiling. He has almost 13% swinging strike rate, 31% called strike plus swinging strike rate. All of the numbers tell you one thing, that when Robby Ray has a good game, he can give you 30 plus fantasy points. And even when he has a bad game, he can still strike out 10.
Yeah, I think he's really site dependent for me today. It's not that I dislike him on DraftKings, but he is just more expensive than every other pitcher. But on Yahoo, he's only $41, which is cheaper than Nola, cheaper than, Barrios, cheaper than all these guys. On FanDuel, he's $8,800, so he's $500 less than Nola. I really like him on those two sites. I'm getting less of him on DraftKings just because of the price difference, but I think it is a perfectly fine matchup against the Pirates. Most of their dangerous hitters are left-handed. Polanco, Bell's a switch hitter, but I think prefer him from the left side. Adam Frazier's a lefty. Starling Marte is fine, but he doesn't have great splits or anything like that. So I think it's a good spot for Ray. He has struggled a bit more at home than on the road over the years. Part of that was before the humidor, but even last year we still saw an elevated walk percentage. But yeah, it's site dependent. I think in my initial DraftKings crunch, I got around 20%, but on Yahoo or FanDuel, I'd be getting more than that.
Yeah, very, very site dependent. I'm with you there. I don't think 10K on DraftKings is crazy either. As a matter of fact, I think his price on FanDuel and Yahoo is crazy. So,
yeah,
look, he's coming up. He's got 2 double-digit strikeout games. He's got a 9K game. That Robby Ray has the strikeout upside, and that's really all I care about. Now, one thing about Robby Ray, though, he does not last very long through games. I mean, I don't think he's pitched more than 6 innings once this season. No, he hasn't. He's pitched 6 innings twice. 5, 5 1/3, 5, 6, 6, 5, 5 1/3, 5 1/3. So, I mean, look, you need the strikeouts there. In 300 plate appearances this season, though, interestingly, the Pirates have the highest K rate against lefties in the league. So limited sample, of course, but they do strike out more against lefties than they have against righties. What do you make about Arizona bats and Nick Kingham? Because if you like Arizona bats, Adam, you are going to have to pay for them. They're not cheap.
Yeah, I think it makes for a really interesting tournament spot on DraftKings. Jake and I talked about it a bit this morning because they're so expensive, basically top to bottom, that you can't get the pitching you want with Arizona, but they're one of the most likely stacks on the slate to be the highest scoring team. And the fact that you can't get the pitching you want is going to drive their ownership down, obviously. So I think it's a really interesting tournament spot to try and get overweight on. Kingham does struggle with left-handed hitters in particular, and they're running out a good lineup here. 4 out of the top 5 hitters are left-handed. The righties in the top 6 are Adam Jones and Christian Walker, who both have been hitting well this year, and both are pretty difficult outs. It's a pretty scary spot for him. And Pittsburgh's bullpen has really been overworked lately. They're not particularly good. If you go to the baseball press and look at the bullpen usage page, they basically all have thrown a lot of pitches recently, with the exception of Michael Feliz hasn't pitched since last Wednesday. But they've been working a lot. So I think it's a really high upside spot for Arizona. It's just that you are taking some pretty big risks at pitcher in order to get to them.
Yes, I think so too. And that's kind of the thing. Even if you're playing, Peacock and Nola or so, it's still tough to get a full 4 or 5 Diamondback stack into your lineup. And I think that's what makes it really difficult. I do want to ask you about Pittsburgh bats, though, because, while both of us think Robby Ray's a good pitcher, and he is a good pitcher with a lot of strikeout upside, Chase Field, even last season, has given him problems. And it's not to say he is not immune to giving up power either. So, I don't think, do you have a Pirates lineup yet? I don't see one yet. You frozen on me? All right, sweet. Looks like we lost Adam. Stone stare straight into the screen. I'm gonna let him know that he froze here. I have a feeling that he doesn't even know it, but I think the Pirates are cheap enough here to where some of them make sense. Like Cervelli, assuming he's in the lineup, is $2,800 on DraftKings. Oh, there you are. Oh, hey, welcome back.
Yeah, I don't know. It just completely froze for a second.
Yeah, I see that. What are your thoughts on Pirate bats, being that they're very cheap and Robby Ray can give up some power?
I think it depends on the site because on DraftKings, the ones that I want aren't really that cheap.
Yeah.
Josh Bell's 5K, Starling Marte's 4,700. You get some leverage against Ray, which is nice, but at least as of the last time I checked our projected ownership, we weren't really projecting the Pirates that low. And I think that makes sense because they were kind of the not very good. They were like the leverage stack that kept popping up in my initial crunch. And if that's how it's going to look for everyone, then I really just don't really have interest in getting there, especially where they're not discounted because I think Robby Ray is good. I don't think the Pirates overall are that good. Getting the Francisco Cervelli as a catcher at a cheap price tag makes perfect sense, but I just don't really see myself getting there a whole lot.
Yeah, no, and you're right. By the way, when I say cheap, I mostly mean Cervelli at a really bad position. $2,800 batting in like the middle, six in the order. I'm all right with that. Aside from that, it's kind of tough. You're right. All right, let's get to the last one here. Seattle and Oakland. Mike Fiers coming off of a no-hitter. A no-hitter for Mike Fiers against Cincinnati. The second of his career, by the way. And Yusei Kikuchi on the other side has been solid. Teams have not been afraid to run on him, though. And he has given up 5 home runs, all to right-handed hitters. So I find this is a pretty interesting matchup. One of the reasons for me, Adam, being that when you look at these Oakland bats, specifically on DraftKings, some of them on Yahoo, but and maybe a couple on FanDuel, but mostly on DraftKings and Yahoo. Chris Davis, dirt cheap. Marcus Semien, sub 4K. Piscotty, super cheap. Even Matt Chapman is very affordable. So while I have some respect for Kikuchi, this is also an Oakland team that is certainly underpriced regardless of matchup and park. What are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think they're clearly underpriced in terms of the upside that they have as hitters, but it's not like Kikuchi's been bad. He doesn't get a lot of strikeouts, but he's only allowed a 158 expected ISO to right-handed hitters. It's not a park that you expect to really play up Oakland's power. And their projected ownership is really high. So it's basically them in Cleveland as the 2 top projected ownership stacks. I would rather get if I can choose one, I would rather get the Cleveland just because I think that Lopez has more blow up potential than Kikuchi does. And I think the park's more favorable for hitters. I kind of prefer getting to Oakland one-offs or mini stacks here because you do have so much power at cheap price tags with guys like Davis and Piscotty and Matt Chapman. I think that, it's pretty likely you get at least like 1 or 2 good performances there. I just don't like the full stack quite as much as I do the Cleveland one because with Lopez, you have someone that'll walk a lot of guys, put a lot of guys on base, and give up power. Kikuchi, more of a pitcher who, maybe gets touched up by 1 or 2 of these guys, but more than likely is going to be able to, kind of limit damage. And I think that shows up in the implied run total too. You're at 4.4 for Oakland, 4.8 for Cleveland. Not a huge difference, but Cleveland, the higher implied run total there. I think that with similarly projected ownership, I'd rather be getting to Cleveland between these two.
Yep, and that's a fair point. Really, if Oakland wasn't super cheap, I don't think we'd talk about them at all. But I do think, irrespective of matchup, they are still really affordable, just given the power that they have and some upside on the base path. But you're right; it's not like they're coming in underowned, so people aren't ignoring them just because they're cheap, or because they're facing Kikuchi. What about Seattle against Mike Fiers? He had a 7% swinging strike rate in that no-hitter, so it's not like he was lights out, but it's not like he's just automatically transformed into some incredible pitcher, at least not in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, he's still what he is. He's capable of going out there and getting some outs. He's not a high strikeout guy. Gives up a lot of fly balls, gives up some power, benefits from pitching in pitcher-friendly parks. I think that Seattle is interesting here, kind of in the same way that Oakland is. Obviously not as cheap, but you do have a lot of power in this lineup, particularly right-handed power with guys like Encarnacion, Santana, and Haniger. They're expensive, so I think that their ownership will be much lower than guys on Oakland, but it's essentially the same spot. Fiers actually gives up more power than Kikuchi does, and you're just looking at these power hitters and hoping that you get 1 or 2 home runs out of them. I like them as one-offs at lower ownership, or mini stacks. Jay Bruce hitting 7th is not ideal, but he's also affordably priced and should come with very little ownership. I think that when you factor in ownership, I actually like getting to Seattle a bit more than Oakland in this game.
Okay, and I don't have any problem with that at all. I think it makes sense, actually. Okay, Haniger, J.P. Crawford batting second, Edwin Encarnacion, Vogelbach, Santana, Omar Narvaez, which, by the way, if you are looking for speed and you think and you like Semien, having Narvaez behind the plate definitely doesn't hurt base stealers here. And then Bruce Healy and Shed Long. Who are your top options from the Mariners?
Yeah, so Crawford for value batting second, but if I'm just looking, for a one-off to score me the most points, it would be Haniger, Encarnacion, and Santana.
Okay.
Over 200 expected ISO for Fiers against right-handed hitters, 235 since last year. 190 for lefties, so it's not like he's great against them, but he's always kind of given up a little bit more power to righties, and these guys all have tons of it against right-handed pitching.
All right. Adam, top stacks here. Only 6 games, 12 teams, and when we talk top stacks, we're not just saying that stacks for, if you're newer to the deep dive, not just the top stacks that we think are going to score the most runs, but the ones that are actually stackable, that make sense to get into your lineups on price, on ownership, and of course on matchup and implied total. So who do you have here, Adam?
Yeah, so considering our current projected ownership, I still like Cleveland. I like trying to get to Arizona, even though they're expensive. I think they have, really slate winning upside there. I like Philadelphia. I like just getting, the talent from Houston in there. Point per dollar, obviously, I really like the A's, but again, they're probably one of the more popular stacks, one of the more over-owned stacks in terms of their matchup versus their expected ownership.
Yeah, I'm with you. Look, ownership's tough here, but Cleveland I still think is the best matchup. And, on some sites, they're just very, very inexpensive given the matchup with Ronaldo Lopez. Minnesota, guys like CJ Cron are really appealing to me. Maybe not as a full out stack. And then with Detroit, you and I talked about this, but the top, of that order, Castellanos I would add to it, but just as a 2-man up top, Goodrum and then Kristen Stewart are decent pairings there. I like Arizona. It's hard to get there. So I think I would go with you in saying that Seattle makes for a very interesting stack today that probably won't have a ton of ownership. All right, we have a minute here. So, Adam, we had a question from one of our premium subs in our Slack chat. I know the dong picks, the home run picks are on Live Before Lock, but can we get your dong picks? All right, yeah, Live Before Lock coming up next. Sorry to steal this from you guys, but it's 2 different people, and it was a request, so we're going to do it anyway. Adam, home run pick today.
Give me Yonder Alonso.
Yonder Alonso, all right. White Sox against Shane. Bieber's been pretty rough against lefties. He definitely has. I'll go with...
Throws a lot of strikes.
Sorry?
Throws a lot of strikes also.
Yeah, right, which can be hit. I'll go with CJ Cron. Really like him today. I think a favorable price point against Skaggs. Yeah, I'll go with Cron there. All right. Hey, before we head out, I'd like to request humbly that if you like the show and you want to see more of it, you hit us with a thumbs up and like the video because it helps us greatly, and we really do appreciate you guys. Wish you the best of luck. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always know when content's going to be dropping next. And Adam and I will be back here with you tomorrow, a much larger Tuesday slate on the Deeper Dive. Live Before Lock is coming up next. Good luck tonight, everyone.